In week 2 of college football, 3 teams were knocked out of the AP Top 25 as a result of losses to non ranked opponents. Oklahoma beat Michigan, and 3 teams were shut out by their competitors this past week. So let's take a look at that in today's video. Before we get into the content in today's video, I did want to apologize for getting this video out so late. It was a result of getting last week's video out pretty late as I had a busy week last week. So I'm hoping that in the coming weeks that my videos will be coming out earlier in the week, hopefully on Monday or Tuesday, so stay tuned to the channel for those videos. First, let's go over the 3 teams that fell out of the AP Top 25. Number 12, Arizona State, played at Mississippi State, and Arizona State was one of the teams that fell out of the AP Top 25 because they lost to Mississippi State. Now this is Mississippi State that was one of the worst teams in the SEC last season that had a record of, I believe it was 2-10. And Arizona State was in the college football playoffs last season. So this was a big surprise to me. Now, Mississippi State scored a touchdown and a field goal in the first quarter of the game. They scored a touchdown in the second quarter, and they scored another touchdown at the end of the fourth quarter. And Arizona State threw 1 interception in the second quarter and 1 interception right after Mississippi State scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter. Arizona State also scored a field goal at the end of the half, and they scored a touchdown at the beginning of the third quarter and another touchdown at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and they scored a field goal in the final 2 minutes of the game, but unfortunately that was not enough for them to win that game. The next team to fall out of the AP Top 25 was number 13, Florida. Now, this game was played at Florida, and it was South Florida that played with Florida. Now, Florida scored a field goal in the first quarter, and Florida and South Florida each scored 2 field goals in the second quarter. South Florida scored a touchdown and a safety in the third quarter. Florida scored a touchdown early in the fourth quarter, retaking the lead in the game. And in the final seconds of the game, South Florida scored a field goal, winning the game 18-16. The final team to fall out of the AP Top 25 was number 17, SMU, and they were shut out by Baylor. Now, this game was played in Dallas at SMU, and the score was tied at the end of the third quarter, and then it was tied again at the end of the fourth quarter, which resulted in the game going into overtime. And in the second overtime, then Baylor was able to score a field goal, and the final score on that game was 48-45. Now, Baylor was talked about earlier in this, I think before the season even started, as a potential AP Top 25 player. However, SMU made it into the AP Top 25. Now, again, they were another team that was in the college football playoffs last season, and they were actually they were actually knocked out of the playoff when they went to Penn State in the first round of the college football playoffs. One of the biggest games for the week was number 15 Michigan at number 18 Oklahoma. And Oklahoma scored a touchdown in the first quarter, the second quarter, and the third quarter. And they missed a field goal early in the fourth quarter, but they scored one after the 2-minute timeout toward the end of the game. And Michigan scored a field goal in the second quarter, and then they scored a rushing touchdown in the first few seconds of the third quarter. And finally, they scored 2 field goals later in the third quarter. And the final score for that game was Oklahoma 24 to Michigan 13. Now, what happened with those teams is Oklahoma moved up in the rankings to number 13, and Michigan fell down to number 23 in the AP Top 25. Now let's go over the shutouts that happened this week. The first one was the noon game that was number 2 Penn State, and they played in-state college, and they hosted Florida International. Now, that game ended up with a final score of 34-0. Now, after a weak first half of the game, Penn State played their best in the fourth quarter of the game, scoring 2 touchdowns in the last 4 minutes of the game. Now, I'm a Penn State fan, and I was very disappointed in their performance in that game, and I thought that they would have done a lot better than what they did. And unfortunately, they did not play their best until the last few minutes of the fourth quarter, where they scored 2 touchdowns. Now, if Penn State continues to play like that the rest of the season, they're not going to make it very far, I don't think. They host Oregon in 2 weeks at Happy Valley, and it's going to be the whiteout game, and it's a 7:30 evening game. And if they play like anything like they did on this past Saturday in that Oregon game, I don't think they're going to win that game. Now, Penn State is favored to win that game because, number one, they're hosting the game at home. Number two, it's a whiteout game. And number 3, Oregon has to travel 3 time zones to play this game. So Penn State is actually favored to win that game. So I'm hoping that they will do better this coming week. On Saturday, they'll be playing Villanova at home, and then they have a bye week, and then they will be hosting Oregon at the end of September. So hopefully they will be able to get their act together between now and then, and hopefully they'll be able to face Oregon and be able to win against Oregon. Now, provided that they win against Oregon, then they should have no trouble in getting into the Big Ten championship game, as long as they have a score of an undefeated score of 12-0, or possibly 11-1, because I don't think that they're going to win against Ohio State again. Unfortunately, I think that Ohio State is going to beat them once again. And that brings me into the second shutout for week 2, and that was Grambling at Ohio State. And that was a 3:30 game played in Columbus. And Grambling just struggled to get the ball down the field in the entire game. Now, in the second quarter, they were able to move the ball a total of 84 yards. And then they were able to attempt a field goal, but they missed it during their first play in the second quarter. And Ohio State, they just dominated in the game, totally blowing out Grambling. And the final score in that game was 70-0. And that just shows right there with that blowout against Grambling and them defeating Texas in week 1, that just shows how good Ohio State is again this season. And I think that they're going to be a very tough opponent for any team that faces them, including Washington, Penn State. I think they play Illinois, and I can't remember all the games that Ohio State plays against this year. I know they do play against Michigan at the end of the season. It's their rivalry game, and that game will actually be played in Ann Arbor at Michigan. So that game is a toss-up. I don't know. The last several years, Michigan has beat Ohio State, and I think that Michigan might actually have a chance at beating them in that game, but for the rest of the season, I think it's going to be very tough to defeat Ohio State at all. And the final shutout for week 2 was UL Monroe at number 21 Alabama. Now, this game was played in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the final score of this game was 73-0, which is a big improvement over week 1, where Alabama lost to Florida State, which was another unranked team, and that win caused Florida State to move into the AP Top 25. Now, in the UL Monroe game, Alabama scored 3 touchdowns in the first quarter, and in the second quarter, they scored 3 more touchdowns, one of which happened after UL Monroe threw a pass interception to Alabama. Alabama scored 1 field goal and 1 touchdown in the third quarter, and UL Monroe fumbled early in the fourth quarter and again late in the fourth quarter, both times recovered by Alabama, and Alabama scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, resulting in the final score of 73-0. Okay, now we'll go over the wins and the losses in the AP Top 25. Now, number 1, Ohio State, they won 70-0, which I already mentioned, and they stay at number 1 in the AP Top 25 for week 3. Number 2, Penn State, they won 34-0 against Florida International, and they stay at number 2 in the AP Top 25. Number 3, LSU won 23-7 against Louisiana Tech, and that game was kind of disappointing, I think, for LSU, being that they didn't win by very much, but I mean, that was 2 scores, but still, that's a fairly low scoring game. But LSU stayed at number 3 in the AP Top 25 rankings. Number 4, Georgia, they played Austin Peay, and they won 28-6. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about that game here. Just bear with me here. Okay. Austin Peay, they scored a field goal in the second quarter, and then they scored another field goal in the third quarter, and then Georgia scored a touchdown in each of the 4 quarters, resulting in the score of 28-6. And as a result of that kind of disappointing game, Georgia actually fell down to number 6 in the AP Top 25 for week 3. And then number 5, Miami. They played Bethune-Cookman and they won 45-3, and they actually stayed at number 5. Number 6, Oregon. They played Oklahoma State and they won 69-3, and that caused Oregon to move up to number 4. Now, I did make some notes on that game too here. Oklahoma State scored a field goal in the third quarter, and that was their only score throughout the entire game. Now, Oregon did miss a field goal late in the third quarter, but they scored 2 pick sixes in a row in the last few minutes of the third quarter, and that was actually one of the games that I watched. I didn't watch the whole game because I was flipping between that and some other games on the TV on Saturday, but I did pick up on that. I did actually see the 2 pick sixes that Oregon did there in the third quarter, and that resulted in a final score of 69-3. And Oregon actually moved up to number 4 in the AP Top 25. Number 7, Texas. They beat San Jose State 38-7, and they actually stayed at number 7 in the AP Top 25. San Jose State was able to score a touchdown in the second quarter, and that resulted in the final score of 38-7. Now, that was a pretty big improvement for Texas, considering that they lost to Ohio State in week 1. Now, that still puts Texas as questionable for the college football playoffs this season, so they're going to have to play better if they actually want to make it into those playoffs, because I've been listening to some podcasts and some people are saying that there's a possibility that Texas may not win some of these games that they play here later in the season, so we'll just have to watch out for that. Number 8, Clemson. They played Troy, and they won 27. Clemson won 27-16 in that game, and that caused Clemson to actually move down in the AP Top 25. They moved down to number 12, and they will face the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets in week 3, which that could potentially be a tough game for Clemson. Now, I did make some notes about that game as well, so let's take a look here. Now, Troy was able to score a touchdown in the first quarter, and they scored a field goal early in the second quarter, then later scored a pick 6. But they threw 2 interceptions in the third quarter, resulting in a touchdown and a field goal for Clemson. And Clemson scored a field goal in the second quarter, entering halftime behind Troy. And then they scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter, resulting in an 11-point win, with the final score again of being 27-16. Now, that was a pretty bad performance for Clemson, and that's another team that they're going to have to play better if they want to make their way into the college football playoffs this season. And then that brings us up to number 9, and that was Number 9, Notre Dame. Now, they were on a bye this week, and they actually moved up to number 8, and they will face Texas A&M in week 3, so look out for that game. And then number 10, South Carolina. They won 30. I can't see that number. Okay, they won 38-10, beating South Carolina State. Number 11, Illinois. Number 10, South Carolina. Now, they actually fell down one slot to number 11. And then number 11, Illinois, they defeated Duke 45-19, and they moved up 2 to number 9 in the AP Top 25 for week 3. Then we have number 12, Arizona State. They lost to Mississippi State, and they fell out of the top 25. And then number 13, Florida. They lost to South Florida 18-16, and they fell out of the top 25. And that actually caused South Florida to move into the AP Top 25. And they are ranked at number 18 for week 3. And they will be facing Miami, so that's going to be an interesting matchup because Miami is ranked number 5 and South Florida is ranked number 18. And South Florida won their first 2 games, and that's what caused them to move into the AP Top 25 for week 3. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins that game. If South Florida wins that game, they're going to move up, and Miami is probably going to move down. I don't think that's going to move Miami completely out of the AP Top 25, but if they do lose that game, but it's probably going to hurt them quite a bit if they do lose to South Florida. Okay. And then number 15, Michigan. I skipped over number 14, Florida State. They won 77-3, defeating East Texas A&M. And that caused Florida State to move up to number 10 in the AP Top 25. Now, they will have a bye week in week 3, so it'll be interesting to see if they stay at number 10. They probably won't move very much in the rankings since they're on a bye for week 3. And then number 15, Michigan, they lost to Oklahoma 24-13. And that caused Michigan to fall down to number 23 and Oklahoma to move up to number 13. And then number 16, Iowa State beat Iowa 16-13, and that caused Iowa State to move up 2 spots to number 14. Now, I did make a note on that game as well, so just bear with me here. Okay, now that was a close game, of course, and that was the big noon game on Fox at noon Eastern on Saturday. Now, Indiana State scored 2 field goals in the first quarter, and Iowa scored a field goal early in the second quarter, and then Iowa threw an interception midway through the second quarter, paving the way for Iowa State to score a touchdown. Iowa also scored a touchdown in the last 30 seconds of the half, and then Iowa scored a field goal in the third quarter, tying the game, and then Iowa State scored a field goal to win the game in the fourth quarter with a final score of 16-13. Now, of course, that was a very close game, and I'm actually surprised that Iowa State moved up 2 points as a result of that narrow win to Iowa. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how Iowa plays the rest of the season. I know they play Penn State this year, and that's going to be an interesting game. I'm not sure I can't remember what other teams they play, but I know they play Penn State, and based on their performance in that game against Iowa State, I don't think they're going to win that game against Penn State. Now, looking at number 17, SMU, they lost to Baylor, and that caused SMU to move out of the AP Top 25. And then we already talked about number 18, Oklahoma, winning to Michigan. And number 19, Texas A&M, they won 44-22, defeating Utah State. And they moved up to number 16 as a result of that win. And then number 20, Ole Miss, they won 30-23 against Kentucky. And Ole Miss actually moved up 3 spots to number 17. And then number 21, Alabama, they defeated UL Monroe 73-0. And that actually caused Alabama to move up in the rankings, but they only moved up to number 19, and they face Wisconsin this week. Now, I think that Alabama's going to win that game. I don't think Wisconsin is going to win that game. They didn't do well last season. They only won 5 games, so they didn't even make a bowl game last season, and I don't think it's going to be much different this season for Wisconsin. So I think Alabama is going to win that game, and depending on how well they do, that could cause them to move up in the rankings for week 4. Now, number 22, Tennessee, they won 72-17 against East Tennessee State, and they moved up to number 15 as a result of that win, which was a pretty big move up for Tennessee. And then we had number 23, Indiana. They defeated Kennesaw State 56-9, which that was actually a pretty good game for Indiana. They actually did pretty well in week 2, which was a lot better than what they did in week 1. And I think that Indiana is going to be a good team again this year. Now, like I said in the last video, their hardest games are going to be against Illinois, Oregon, and Penn State. And I think that the only game that they may win out of those 3 might be against Illinois. I don't think they're going to be able to beat Oregon or Penn State in those games. So, as a result of that win, they only moved up 1 spot to number 22, which I thought they could have moved up a little bit higher, but they didn't. They only moved up 1 spot. And then number 24, Texas Tech, they beat Kent State 62-14, and that win caused Texas Tech to move up to number 21 in the AP Top 25. Now, Kent State was actually able to score. They were actually able to score 2 touchdowns in that game. Texas Tech scored 3 touchdowns in the first quarter, and in the second quarter, Texas Tech scored 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals, and then they scored a touchdown in the third quarter. Kent State scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and the second of which occurred after Texas Tech fumbled the ball. And Texas Tech scored 1 touchdown in the fourth quarter, and that resulted in the 62 to 14 win against Kent State. Now, it'll be interesting to see how Kent State does this year, because last year they were the worst team in FBS because they had a record of 0-12. So they didn't do well at all last year, and I know they played Penn State last year, and Penn State blew them out when they played them in, I think it was week 3 of last season. And then number 25 Utah, they beat Cal Poly 63-9, and they moved up in the rankings to number 20. And then the 2 other teams that moved into the AP Top 25 besides South Florida were Auburn. They moved in at number 24, and Missouri moved into the AP Top 25 at number 25. And this week in week 3 they play Louisiana. So I think that'll be an easy win for Missouri. And as I said in the last video, Missouri's doing pretty good this year, and I mean, they have a good quarterback, Bo Pribula, who was the backup quarterback at Penn State last season. So I think that since they got Bo Pribula as their quarterback, I think that they may actually have a chance at doing pretty well this season. But we'll just have to see how well they do in the coming weeks. That's going to conclude this week's video. Now, next week I'm hoping to do more than just one video, so be sure to stay tuned to the channel for that. And if you liked what you saw in the video, please give the video a like down below and subscribe to the channel. Now, if you would like to see my last video where I did a recap of week 1, click this video right here. I want to thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you in the next video. You be blessed, stay safe, and bye for now.